Welcome. Why's my camera not working now? Come on. All right, welcome to BizDev Live, the beauty of live television here. We're going to get into it. We are on location today in Diane Wah's fabulous studio. To prove it, I'm going to bring her into my camera view so you can see that we're actually here together, but we're going to keep it so I can actually focus on her. It is Martin Luther King Day. In these times, January 2021, I just want to remind folks, I'm going to focus on me for a moment. Listen, we always have the right time to do the right thing in so many words and all the many quotes that you're going to hear from Martin Luther King and you're going to read today. The big idea is this: we as a people will never, we will never get further ahead if we are putting someone else below. And I don't care who you are and what side of the equation you fit. We need to see each other like real human beings and work with each other, listen to each other, be understanding of each other. And in that way, we will make a better world. So we're going to get into Diane Wah, her photography, her corporate background, all the beautiful things that she's doing with her studio, with her record company, right after the Biz Dev theme. Stick with me. We'll be right back.
Biz Dev Live, weekdays at 11 Eastern Time. Biz Dev Live, weekdays at 11 Eastern Time. Biz D with C, brought to you by Cameron T. Biz D with C, brought to you by Cameron T. This is business development, not even selling it. This is intelligent. If you watch it, I promise you benefit. Leadership and motivation, empathy and inspiration. Leadership and motivation, empathy and inspiration. Biz Dev Live, weekdays at 11 Eastern Time. Biz Dev Live, weekdays at 11 Eastern Time. Biz D with C, brought to you by Cameron T. Biz D with C, brought to you by Cameron T.
Diane Wah Zuercher is a Brooklyn-based conceptual artist working primarily in photography and installation. Her practice focuses primarily on the narrative simulcra of portraiture. Well, why are you messing with me, Diane? And digital iconography. I should run through this before I start. In popular culture, a recipient of 2009 Marie Walsh Sharpe Foundation's residency, Wah received her M.F.A. from Columbia University and her B.A. from the New School University. She's exhibiting her work nationally for the past 10 years. She is currently creative director and co-founder of the Brooklyn Temple of Epistemological Practice. Thank you. Yeah, I really should have. We were too busy talking before, and I didn't run through the bio real quick, which I usually do. Forgive me. Diane, thanks for being on the show with me.
Thanks for having me.
Allowing me in your studio space. We're going to do some post videos where I'm walking around, so definitely check that out. I was taking photos of the beautiful art in the front of the building as you even come in. So it's just a great, very welcoming, very artistic. I was telling, it reminds me of the early days of the Lower East Side when I was growing up. It's a fabulous kind of place with a lot of art going on. So tell everybody what you're doing right now, the type of photography that you do, the type of work that you're currently doing with folks. I know you're doing not only headshots, but you got your music company that you're working on. You invite people into the studio for both photo shoots and events. Talk to us a little bit more about that.
Okay, so right now, I guess to sum it all up, I help people look cool. For me, photography exists as primarily two different functions. The first function, which is probably the closest to my heart, is photography as an art practice. It's how I express myself, my beliefs, how I express my heart, just my thoughts and stuff like that. And it works for me fundamentally different than photography as this utilitarian concept, meaning that you use photographs for different things like headshots, to kind of brand your business, to let people know what you're doing. So it has these two fundamentally different functions. I started off actually in the other function, photography as art, but photography always kind of had to serve this other thing for me. So when I was back at the new school, for about 5 minutes, I thought I wanted to be an anthropologist. So I was just like, oh yeah, I'm going to be an anthropologist, and I'm going to like support my anthropology with photography. I'm going to take pictures of my subjects. And yeah, I ended up not doing that. I always had to.
What was because I just want to just jump in. What was the main piece of that you were like, nope, I can't be an anthropologist. I don't want to do that.
Well, for starters, I realized that anthropology is a profoundly racist discipline. It was kind of what the colonizers used to kind of go into the countries that they were colonizing, learn about the natives so that they can find a better way to conquer them. At the time, I was working on my thesis at the new school, and I was researching the prison to school pipeline. So I was like working as a teaching artist at Rikers Island. I was working at a bunch of different schools in the South Bronx and in Brooklyn. And I was just like, okay, well, I was doing these ethnographies, taking everyone's personal stories to kind of understand the prison to school pipeline. And at the time, no one was really talking about the fact that prisons and schools operate the same way, and that you're going to
have to break that down for folks, because people are going to be like, what?
Yes. Actually, prisons and schools function predominantly the same way. And the prison to school pipeline is this idea that if you go to Rikers right now and look at the demographics of the people currently at Rikers, a huge majority of the people have been either in the foster system. They also come from the same 5 neighborhoods in New York. And if you look at the schools architecturally, the way that schools are set up, they have bars on the windows. When you go to the bathroom, even you can always see people's feet. That's not an accident. That's so that you can constantly be observed. But what was interesting was when I was teaching at Rikers and I was teaching in Island Academy, it didn't look any different from the schools that I was teaching at in the South Bronx, the schools I was teaching at in East New York. And I realized that was on purpose. So I had this really important message, but I was also working with very vulnerable populations. So people that can't really speak for themselves. So it made me feel a certain way to be going into schools and taking pictures of a bunch of kids that had no agency, going into prisons, taking pictures of a bunch of prisoners that had no agency. And even though I had the best of intentions, that power dynamic didn't really sit well with me.
I think that it's really interesting that we started this conversation on the anthropology thing, because as you were talking about why you didn't want to go into anthropology, and for everybody that's watching this, me and Diane, we went to college together. I did for a little while, and she actually finished and got a degree. And
don't worry, I got enough degree for both of us.
So one of the really interesting things in just noting and seeing a couple of anthropologists that are out there in the world, people that call themselves anthropologists. And there's this whole thing with anthropology is that I'm going to learn, I'm going to study, but I'm not going to get involved, right? That's against the, creed of the anthropologist. Like I'm an observer. I'm the watcher, like Marvel Comics. I'm the watcher. I don't interfere in the affairs of man. I just document it, and I'll let you guys work out. I'll just make my observations. But I think we all know that you can't, and we've had that pushed to the test over the last 4 years. It's very difficult to be an observer and not put some sort of slant or opinion on it. So probably a lot better, at least in my mind, to at least be very forthright with what your slant or your take on the issues are and make that very clear. For example, if I'm talking about the stock market, the fact that I own stocks, right?
That matters.
Right? That kind of thing. So that, that you have that disclosure, that I'm not just talking about this and I'm being sly with it and I'm in this stock and you don't know that, right? Or that this company sponsors it. When Time reports on Time, they have to say, and Time owns this.
By the way, yeah. And that was actually the funny thing for me was that, like I said, even though I had the best intentions, these people aren't lab rats. And, at the end of the day, I was doing this for my thesis project for the new school. So of course I'm benefiting from this. Yeah. And there was no way around it. And that struggle was kind of what started me in my journey in photography. Because one of the other big things was that I'd written this big paper or whatever, and then I realized at the end of it, I got an A on it or whatever. And I was like, maybe 5 people are going to ever read this. And the people that I'm writing about are definitely never going to read this. And they're the ones who need this the most. So that struggle of like having this passion to kind of help people, but not being able to help people in the way that I thought that I could help people was very frustrating for me. Because, my parents are cab drivers. I'm from Queens. So, going to college was a huge deal. I was the first person in my family to get a degree. So
congratulations, by the way. Yeah.
So, but you grow up, go get a degree, go to college, and then you can help your people. And that wasn't happening after all that time. So I was just like, okay, this isn't working. I got to do something different. So at the time I'm still, taking pictures. And can I tell that story about how I started? So I'm taking pictures on film, and I couldn't afford to process the film. So I was like shoplifting little rolls of film from CVS. But statute of limitations is gone. Now,
you can't catch her. It's done. It's over.
Done. Watch, CVS is going to come by and be like, you owe me some money. But
now they're ready to sponsor you.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But at the time, nobody was shooting film, so no one cared. But I somehow ended up getting into the Columbia University M.F.A program to do fine art photography. And I'll be honest with you, I had no idea what that was. I wanted to go to like SVA. I was like, I'm going to do headshots and blah, blah, blah. And I would have been cool with that, for doing that for the rest of my life. But fine art photography is like the unicorn of photography, meaning you kind of come up with concepts, come up with interesting pictures, and then a gallery shows your work. You sell your work as prints. And it's a totally different business model. And it kind of blew my mind because, I'm West Indian. So like doctor, lawyer, engineer. And so, my parents would be like, what are you doing for a living? I'm like, I'm writing jokes about dumb stuff and then taking pictures of them. And then, I get a write-up in the New York Times. So I'm like, okay, so I guess this is what I'm doing. But it was an interesting journey for me because I got kind of thrust into it. But like I was telling you before we started, after I graduated from Columbia, I got my first residency. So I'm like super, super excited. It was at 20 J Street. And it was one of those studios that you like see in the movies when there's like a movie about artists in New York.
Yeah.
And it had like this beautiful view of the Brooklyn Bridge. And it was absolutely empty because I had no money to actually make any new work.
So at this point, you already had your degree, your master's?
Yes, I just got my master's around 2008. So the market had crashed. So there were no jobs. They weren't giving out loans because my camera equipment, I needed to update my camera equipment. While I was in school, I could just shoot film, which was affordable for me at the time. But to get a digital camera where I can actually
so
freelance.
Just to sort of paint this picture, right? So this is 2008.
Mm-hmm.
You're in a position where I think a lot of college graduates and even master school graduates find themselves in. You're got some debt with school.
Yeah.
You are very qualified, maybe overly qualified, but you don't have a whole lot of experience and connections on your resume and are kind of stuck out there in that sort of no man's land of, all right, I'm ready to go.
But I'm just kind of stuck. He was my husband at the time, but my boyfriend at the time is now my husband. After my residency ended, we just said, forget it. Let's move to Ohio. He's from Ohio. I needed a break from New York. I'd been born and raised here. And I just said, whatever. And it was actually probably one of the most influential moves that I ever made for a multitude of reasons. But the main one being that I found a completely new way to make art. Now, one of the things that I always say to a lot of young artists is that New York is a really great place to show art, because there's tons of people here. And you know how it is in New York. Things happen really fast. The right person sees you or you make a connection.
If you're in the right scene.
If you're in the right scene, things can happen to you pop, pop, pop really fast.
The money's here. Right.
The money's here. But most artists are working that 9 to 5 and that 6 to 10. And it's really hard to take risks and to experiment, to really do your art. But out there, the cost of living was dirt cheap. So for the first year, I actually didn't even tell people that I'd moved. So Andy and I, what I would do is I would get these
because there was people like me saying like, Ohio, why?
Ohio,
why? What are we doing in Ohio? What's going on in Ohio? Yeah,
well, that was the thing. When I was living in New York, I almost never saw my friends except for like Facebook. So when we moved out there, you know, I'd gotten an adjunct job teaching, and they weren't paying me a lot of money, but they gave me access 24/7 to a darkroom and 24/7 access to a print lab and a computer lab. So I was in there making prints, just doing a whole bunch of work. And we had this dope apartment that was really cheap. And at the time, we had like 50-50 parenting with my stepson. So we were trying to do that work-life balance. So we had turned the second floor into a studio. Now in Toledo, there's tons and tons of space. There's tons of recording studios. But what was really interesting was that everyone would come to our house to record. So we had turned our master bedroom into a recording studio. It was right next to.
Why was that? What was different about your studio in the house?
Well, what was different about it was that, for starters, it was really homey. My couch has been home to many musicians at different states, but because it was really homey, and you know, a lot of times we'd be cooking dinner, or we were kind of like everyone's mom and dad in a lot of ways. That allowed people to be more comfortable with recording. So that was one thing, and the other thing too was that Andy would be constantly tweaking the space because it was his home studio. With most commercial studios, they have to keep it a certain way. They call it zeroing out a room. So there's not a lot of, it's very sanitized. And it looks really cool in pictures. And it looks really cool when you first go to a studio and you're like, oh, wow, I'm doing something really important. But one of the things I noticed consistently was that people would get intimidated by the big studio. But then also,
well, it's hard, right? So you feel like you got to put it all on there. You're usually spending money on it, so it puts a lot of pressure on it.
Yeah, you're constantly thinking about the time. You'd be paying like maybe 40 to 50, 60, 75 sometimes, depending on if you have orchestration, $150 an hour for that time. And the things that make something look corporate and professional are the antithesis of what makes an artist feel comfortable. And then also, as a business owner, because Andy was using it for his own personal use, he didn't have to finish it in a day. He built one part one way, and then he would get it perfect, and then he would constantly tweak it. I remember one time he was taking our pillows, he was like putting it in the bass drum, but once he got it sounding perfect, he would leave it. But this was a process that would take weeks and take months. So finally, we didn't have the biggest corporate sound, but we had a really warm, very unique sound. And he had kind of got it set up sounding kind of like a basement and a barn studio. So it was really warm. So when people would come in there and sing or play, it would always sound like an Erykah Badu album or something. So I was really surprised. I'd be cooking dinner and then I'd see this whole band, you know, walking past me all the way up to the stairs. And I'm like, y'all have all this room and you're coming to my house to record. And I'd had this kind of like aha moment about not just as an artist, but also as a business owner, how much time we saved and how much money we saved by having everything in our home. And also like that work-life balance. You know, we would put Parker to bed and then have rehearsal right afterwards. And it allowed us to make a lot more consistent work. Now, me as a visual artist, what I was doing was I had all this space as well. So I would make all of this work because small towns, the time moves a lot slower. So I'd make all this work. And then about once a month, I'd have a gallery show, or Andy would have a gig. We'd pack up the van and then we'd go do the gallery show, make our rounds, go see everybody.
Were you doing that in Ohio?
In
Toledo?
Yeah. So we were based out in Toledo, but all my shows and all Andy's shows were in New York.
Mm.
So that was when I didn't tell people that I'd left. And what was funny was that I actually saw my friends more when I lived in Ohio than when I was living in New York. Because
they're excited you're coming into town, or just, yeah.
They're excited that I'm coming into town. I actually got to experience New York as a tourist.
Yeah.
And I realized how much I wasn't really interacting with New York when I lived here. I never went to shows. I didn't go to like the Statue of I didn't do any of those things.
So because I know we went to New School, Eugene Lane College together, and then for your master's, where'd you go?
Columbia University.
So everything was just in the heart of the city. Mm-hmm. I mean, I love that that's part of your story, because with the nonprofit that I've spent the last 24 years with, we talk about pushing people to go outside of the city for their education, not because the school is going to be so much better than Columbia. Columbia is a great school. NYU is an amazing school. There's so many great schools within the city. However, if you've grown up in the city, one of the reasons that people are going to come to New York City, from Africa, from Europe, from China, from Australia, is they want to experience this crossroads of the world. But if you're literally born at the crossroads of the world, and you're grown up in that, to step outside of it and get a different perspective and a different view is so important. And so many people will grow up in like Queens or Brooklyn or the Bronx or even the Heights inside of, and not really get out of that and do the tourism thing and do the things that are really fun and entertaining in the city. A lot of that has to usually do with the economics, but I think people in general, like if you grew up in Toledo, do you go to Cleveland and really enjoy Cleveland? I just think there's it traveling like opens up your mind, opens up the world, and it's such a big deal. And I love that that's a part of your story, because you can sort of see that. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, like you said, I went to some very good schools, but I think some of the things that probably influenced me the most in the most positive ways as an artist was moving to Toledo. They make art different out there. Living in New York, nobody's handy here. You hire a handyman for everything. Everything's very kind of like small. At the time I was making like really small 8x10 prints. I was outsourcing a lot of stuff. But then in Toledo, I got more into like the DIY movement. I started working with my hands more, started building our own furniture. Like my husband and I would argue all the time. He would be like, oh, we could do it ourselves. We can build it ourselves. And I'd be like, well, why? But it's because I didn't know anyone that was very utilitarian in that way. But in Toledo, yes, Zuercher, yeah, that's it. But in Toledo, I got a chance to be bored. I'm serious. In New York, especially if you grow up in New York, you're never
There's
bored.
always something to do. Yeah.
There's always something to do. So I'm like showing up to Toledo, like, and everyone in Toledo is in no rush. And so all of the ideas that I'd had backed up in New York that I was never I never had enough time to do.
Because so much is always being thrown at you visually. People just we're all on the New York, like, let's boom, 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 no time. Yeah.
It's like, it's the city that people would ask me in Toledo, like, oh, you live in New York. Why would you ever move to Toledo? I was like, I'm from the city that doesn't sleep and I'm exhausted. And I was just like, oh my goodness, I couldn't remember the last time I'd ever been bored. And, when I was out there, I could do things like read. I could experiment. I could just do stuff.
You're saying that now to me, and I'm like, I got 4 kids at home. I picked up, some new books, and I can go out and do my exercise. I can listen to Audible, but like sitting down with the book and having the energy and the space to read is like non-existent in my life.
Non-existent.
Yeah.
And it was really amazing because it allowed me to expand my work, because now I was, this was when I was still working in making work in fine art. I was making these huge, enormous, like mural size pieces now. And normally I wouldn't do them in New York because the cost of just framing a photographic piece that's 8 feet tall is in the thousands. So that was prohibitively expensive for me. But in Toledo, I made my own frames.
You had space, and
I had space. I had access to equipment. So even though
this is for folks that are watching this. This is something that's part of Diane's story. That's really cool. Her and her husband Andy, they have built this studio space. It's she's telling me she's built this stuff, and I'm just like, really, this is incredible, right? So this idea of being able to build out your own stuff and control your destiny, so to speak, it's just an amazing thing, and the freedom that it gives you, that's amazing.
Absolutely. And that's exactly the right word, the freedom, because finally I could actually live out my imagination, because my imagination was always this big.
Yeah.
But my access to those things was really small. So like I had that great residency, and I always equated it to having, Park Avenue apartment and no furniture.
Interactions with CVS, yes.
Yeah. So in Toledo, I was able to do this. So I'd gotten an opportunity to be in a show at the Tilton Gallery, which was a big gallery, and it was going to be like my first like really big gallery. And the person who got me the show, they were like, Diane, this is a big deal. Like if you play your cards right, you can get New York Times or whatever. And I did this shoot, and it was in response to the Haiti earthquake. Because at the time I was in Ohio, and I was kind of mourning, so I wanted to do a piece that kind of worked through that. So it was a piece where I have these people kind of in the fetal position, naked in some rocks. But it was a huge production. It was very different from the things I was doing, because before I was just kind of like, I had my little 35 millimeter camera. I was shooting on the street, just whatever light I had. But this was a huge production. I had to like bury 2 adults in rocks and then but I could do that there. I had my students help me. They were interning on the project, and there was probably at least 10 people on set, but I could never do something like that in New York. And so I ended up showing this work, and I ended up selling it for a lot of money. And I was just like, wow. And again, another aha moment, because I actually was making more money selling artwork, which I thought was impossible, than I was teaching. And the reason why was because I was selling the work out of my studio, and I wasn't giving a gallery 50%. And also my production costs were almost nothing. So just by saving a whole bunch of money.
And I want to just bring this up, because this is all happening, and me and Diane known each other this is all like the first time I'm hearing any of this. So for anybody that's got like a social media account, tag your friends. There's a lot going on in the world. There's a lot of noise. Tag your friends, let them know what's going on, because I'm like, holy, I didn't know this was, so this is amazing. Go ahead.
So going. I'm sitting here in New York. I was technically making way more money when I was in New York, but I was spending so much of it on rent.
Right.
I was spending every dime I could on either photography equipment, or at the time, because I didn't have the right photography equipment, I was renting equipment. So when I got a gig, I would have to rent my equipment from like Adorama or B&H. And my husband's the same way. Like any extra money we have would go towards gear or whatnot. But you're always kind of treading water. You never kind of were able to make any traction and make any leaps. But going to Toledo, by lowering my cost of production, lowering my rent, lowering my overhead, it put me in a position to actually keep more of the money that I was making. So I was talking to a friend of mine. I was just like, saving money is the new making money.
Oh yeah, and I think that's great that you're talking about that, because people are always worried about, and it's always said, right? There's a couple of different ways that you can change the way that you earn income. You increase your revenue, which I think a lot of people are rightfully so focused on. But the other side of it is you can decrease your costs. You can decrease the debits that you have towards your income, the cost of doing business and moving to a new location. I mean, there's so many businesses right now taking advantage of the work from home moment that, yes, we don't need to be in New York City or San Francisco, to the most, expensive places.
Just having, just being able to, like, Toledo's about 8 or 9 hours away from New York, especially if you're like speeding, you could probably do it in 7. But when I looked at like all of my costs or whatnot, it was a lot easier for me to travel to New York, even as often as once a month or once every 2 weeks, and really look around at your friends. How many of them do you actually physically see? And I wasn't. I was really interacting with most of my friends online. I was interacting with my friends over the phone, but I had I'd laid that groundwork already. My friends weren't going anywhere. But I could still maintain those relationships. Now I would have to move them virtually, but that's kind of prepared me for this whole COVID situation because now everyone's in the same boat. But I would, make the time to really talk to people and maintain those relationships. But I could work at a much bigger scale.
All right, so we've been doing this whole Toledo thing. We'll get the kudos from the Ohio Tourism Board here, right? But you are back in New York City. So how did this good ride end in Ohio? Why did that come to an end?
Well, at the end of the day, I'm still a New Yorker. So so as much, we would spend a lot of time in Toledo, but today's Martin Luther King Day, so it's probably an appropriate time to talk about it. One of the things that being in Toledo also taught me was understanding why Ohio is a battleground state. Ohio is a really great microcosm of America, I think. And I realized when I moved there that New Yorkers, and I'm including myself in this, we live in this very liberal bubble. Like all of the most like fancy people from all over the world, all the most cosmopolitan people, usually very progressive people move to New York. So it's really easy to imagine that the rest of the world is like this. And it's not. So that's where I kind of came face to face with gun culture, how heavy it is out there. At the time, Obama was president. So, we dealt with a lot of very ignorant people. And, my husband's white, we're in an interracial relationship. And then my stepson's mixed. So, we're pretty alt for New York, but being out there was kind of tough. And I was really missing my friends a lot. So, I really wanted to move back to New York as far as like that being our home base. It was a really good break from New York. I'm so glad that I live there. And some Toledoans are some of the best people, but there's a lot of other people too that represent the rest of America. And so come back to New York and we're back to the grind. And I'm like missing Toledo now because I'm just like, oh man, I wish I could have that same kind of experience working. But how can I do that and still be in New York near my friends and family? And that's where we came to opening up the studio. Because at the time, I was a head photographer for corporate communications at Macy's. So we were, I did all the photography in there. So like all the fit photos.
And for my folks that are trying to get in on the corporate side, how did you maneuver that? How did you get into Macy's?
Old fashioned way. I got the job through a friend of mine I went to high school with. But
who you know, not what you know. Right?
You know, not what you know. But he actually worked in tech support. So when I first got hired, I was working under the umbrella of tech support, and he had proposed to his boss that it was easier or cheaper or to make a video, like they were doing a tutorial, like a teaching video in-house than it was to hire. So he started basically
and this goes back to your point, right? And I think this is, especially in this day and age, every company needs to be a media company. If you're Macy's, you really need to be a media company. But this idea that, you can go and hire somebody to do one video for you, and maybe that's an amazing video. But then where does that leave you? Because you're only going to want to do more videos. You're going to want to do more media.
Yeah. Content is king. Because when I didn't go into Macy's through the front door, they didn't hire me as a photographer. I created that job, actually. They hired me actually as a designer at first. And basically that was my official title, but really it was make things pretty for the coders. Because technically I was under tech support. So I was the only creative under tech support, but I had a little bit of a programming background. Not a lot, just enough to be able to talk to the coders. I could speak their language. So I was the go-between between like the coders. I'm sorry, there's something in my eye. I was so we had like these old Russian coders. So they were hardcore coders, but they don't like people. And I spoke their language. And so I was the go-between between.
And when you say you spoke their language, I'm assuming maybe you don't speak Russian. I don't know.
No, not Russian.
But I'm a very technical person.
I did a lot of coding growing up. And so here's another takeaway is this idea that you need to be perfect or even that great at a skill set for it to be useful. So I wasn't a good enough coder to be Mark Zuckerberg, but I was a good enough coder to not call something a thingy like the lady in HR.
Yes.
So I was a good enough coder that when they told me that they need an image to be a very specific pixel height and width, I didn't give them a bunch of crap about it. When they gave me a list of things that they needed from a coding standpoint,
getting comfortable with those 1280 by 720 YouTube thumbnails. I'm proud of myself. I'm going to pat myself on the back.
Or they said, I absolutely need this picture to be, under a megabyte in order for this page to load quicker. I didn't give them a bunch of crap, and I was able to do that. So it wasn't that I was necessarily the best coder, but it gave me insight. And it gave me the ability to communicate with them in the way that they wanted to be communicated.
I love that, because I feel like there's so many people that just don't take the time to educate themselves. And we live in a time where literally pick up your phone, right? Pick up, type into Google, and it's really just that far away if you want to get a little bit more educated on something. And so if you're in corporate or if you're on, the consultancy agency, solopreneur side, somebody's talking some stuff, look it up.
And that's how I survived 18 layoffs. So when I wasn't really getting a lot of opportunities in the corporate sector. When I came in as a temp hire. But I was able to, the way that I kind of worked the system was, I did what, you hear this a lot in internships, find the job that no one else wants to do and be an expert at it. But so it's not just find the job that no one else wants to do, be friends with the people that no one wants to be friends with. So I was friends with all the security guards. I was friends with all the coders. And the thing about the coders is that the coders control everything. And to the point where they would have tons of vacation days, but they never took them because they made their job essential. They would make their jobs essential so that the company could not survive without them, but they also could never take any vacation days. But here I am. I'm not a coder. I'm not trying to take their job. I'm not competing with them, but they need to use those vacation days. So I would just sit around and I'd be like, hey, teach me how to do that. Teach me how to do that. And I wasn't afraid of technology. I wasn't afraid of teaching myself stuff. So
I love that. I love that so much. Yeah.
So the way that I kind of would always stay a step ahead was that Macy's is a very old company. We had a lot of employees that were working there 15, 20, 25. We had people that had been Macy's from their first job. They worked as a clerk in one of the stores and
Did
had
they
been there
get
40
pins
years.
away and like
Actually, my boss had been there. He'd been there 25 years, and I was like the same age, but he had done his internship. So Macy's was known as this place where you can kind of retire at. But that business model no longer exists because I started seeing them lay people off, and it was by age. They started with the oldest people first, the people that were on the verge of retirement.
No, it's been rough. And in the pandemic, you've seen a lot of companies do it. I've seen it with companies that I've worked with where, they've laid off these people that have been working with them for 35 years. Meanwhile, it's not ageism in the sense of like, oh, we don't want you because you're old, because this other person that had been working for the company that's of the same age, they're hiring them back. Get rid of the benefits, get rid of the, it's just cost savings.
Exactly. Yeah. And actually, like you said, it isn't ageism. I mean, my youth factored into it, into a particular attitude that I had, but it wasn't my youth because I'm not that young anymore. But I wasn't afraid to change. And the problem with the people that were a little older was that they had their jobs and they didn't want to change. So
you get the bean cutters plus the new age, whatever, we're going to do this, and the consultants step in and
it was just there was a lot of bloating. So I won't name any names, but there was a woman I remember that I worked with. She had been there a very, very long time. And she actually worked in tech support. And she was like in charge of setting up people's phones. And she did it for like, I think 5 or 6 floors. But to the other guy who did her job, managed the entire East Coast. So you can see the writing on the wall that if the company needs to cut back, That's who's gonna go.
So talk to me. So you're doing this stuff with Macy's all the time, but you're also setting up the studio?
Well, yes, because like I said, the easiest way to kind of protect yourself is to not stick your head in the sand when it comes to business. It was really easy to see the writing on the wall. Layoffs were increasing. And even though, I was deemed business critical, I knew, especially at my price point, at some point, it's not if, but at some point, they're going to find someone cheaper than me. I was making a decent salary for my age, but at some point they're gonna, like I said, like they're an old company. So certain things have to change. So the most traditional way for an old company to cut costs is cut people. Now, at the time that I started, Macy's was a huge company. So there was a lot of cutting that you can do, but it's only a matter of time before they get to you.
Yeah. And their model right now, and I love this because, this program is really for, small businesses and entrepreneurs. I'm not expecting the heads of Macy's to be watching this, but if they were, like, they have such an amazing opportunity. My wife is, we talked about this before jumping on this, that she's one of these folks that just, they live and breathe Macy's. They're all about Macy's. The Macy's by us is closing down. And she years ago was very much against like buying anything online. So I buy stuff on Amazon. She's like, no, I gotta try it. I gotta wear it on. But even now, like, she's gotten into the mode with like something at Macy's. Well, they don't have it in stock. I'll order it and it'll come to the house. So, they're just slowly creeping into really taking advantage of it. Meanwhile, the rest of the world is sort of just moving past them.
And well, that's the thing.
And they have a huge opportunity because they have all the brick and mortar shops.
They have all the brick and mortar shops, but I think most of the money comes from real estate. But also companies are people.
And when you say most of the money comes from real estate, just because I love the business angle on this, they have all these stores. They do a ton of business of close out the door. Why are you saying they get most of their money from real estate?
Well, and this comes back to one of the lessons that I learned in Toledo as far as owning the means of production. So one of the places that Macy's was really a market leader was their in-house brands. So and I would work with these designers. So they would have their own designers instead of like, I'm the store Macy's, so I'm going to get, Donna Karan, Saks Fifth Avenue or whatever, to come in and sell in my store. Well, guess what? They don't make that much money off of somebody else's brand. Because at the end of the day, they're taking a percentage off the top. If a bag costs $100, maybe Macy's might get maybe 10% for putting it in the store. But if Macy's designs that bag and Macy's owns the design for that bag and Macy's produces that bag for, say, $20, now they're making $80 on their own version of the $100 bag.
Yeah.
So that also taught me a lot.
So what are some of the brands that Macy's owns?
I can't remember. You're quizzing me right now.
No, this is interesting because I'm going through my head of all the brands that are going through my wife's shopping bag. So it was interesting to me.
I can't remember.
But I love that because in terms of a business strategy, right? You talk about, and Amazon is doing it right now, which, I think that's the big, beast in the sales and marketing and retail. We're all competing with Amazon, and some they're even getting into now. You can stream your show on Amazon. I just was looking into that the other day, and people are starting that, and people are selling things through their show. It's crazy how many tentacles are out there. But the interesting thing, like going back to sort of today's takeaway, is that idea of owning what you sell,
owning the entire
space,
owning the entire means of production. So from the thing that you design, so owning that intellectual property in and of itself, but then owning how that thing gets made. And there's a lot of things that you can do to control how much that costs. But then you can sit there and sell the same thing at the same price as your competitor, but because you own so much of how it's made, you get to keep a lot more of it.
Right.
Because you're not outsourcing things. Because when you outsource something, it will cost the price increase is exponential.
Well, we talked about it in the video, right? So if you especially if it's something you need on an ongoing basis. You know, if it's a one-time thing, I just need this one time. I need a billboard for the outside of the building. You know, maybe I don't need to create a department inside my company for that, right? But if I'm going to regularly need video, regularly need e-commerce, right? If I'm regularly going to need to update the website, which any kind of, you know, big, huge retail chain that's going to continually to have new items and products on their website, probably not the best thing to outsource it to Shopify, right? Because
well, the thing is that they get you. Honestly, I was gonna say they're like drug dealers. They get you dependent on them, and then it's not so much that they'll necessarily jack up the price, like say with Netflix or whatever, but they control the conversation.
That's the power, right?
It's the power. Yeah. So, for example, Facebook, when we were in college, was something where, you know, you just kind of goofed off with your friends, and now it's deciding elections.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the new currency, there are all these things now that are currency. And I think the big buzzword now is currency as opposed to just money. Because money gets your foot in the door. Money's money. But influence is the new currency right now. And I think it's been, for a lot of new businesses that are starting, especially people that are older or whatever, kind of wrapping your head around that. So for example, you know, the money that I was making at Macy's, yes, that existed in its sector. But the thing that was really valuable was the influence that I had, the influence to not get laid off. But it's exhausting to kind of constantly do that. So I knew that I would need an exit strategy. This world that my parents lived in, where you went to college, you got a degree, you found a good company, and then you would just kind of sit there until retirement. I was like, that doesn't exist. Right. And I'm watching my mom get older and older. You know, my mom's, like I said before, both my parents are cab drivers. She's getting older. She can't just sit down all the time. You know, her back was getting messed up. So she had to find.
Yeah, sitting is a killer. I'm working on getting my standing desk. Yeah.
Well, actually, that was one of the other reasons why I wanted to leave the corporate world, because like I was doing really well teaching, you know, I was standing all the time and moving all the time. I finally get this day job, which is supposed to be my dream job. This is supposed to be a full-time paid salary position as a photographer. I should have been having
at a top corporation,
job security. So when I hurt my back, I was able to get full paid medical leave. So yeah, that security is great, but that security is short term. They're not going to keep me forever. They're going to get some intern that can do what I do for a fraction of the cost as soon as they get an opportunity. And understanding that was what kept me a step ahead. So at the time, you know, my husband was working, he was actually working for IBM in tech support. So we both had our day jobs, but for some reason we were always living check to check. And the rule book that society had kind of set out as to what I was supposed to do, I was doing it, but I didn't feel secure. I had a mountain of debt. So even though I was making good money, it wasn't enough money to offset my debt. So I was just like, we need an exit strategy. So we took a leap of faith, you know, looked at our finances, and we secured a lease on this place. And at the time that we'd gotten this place, it was just supposed to be a place to work from home. Because it was just like, I was working at Macy's, but I wasn't working on my own art. He wasn't working on his art. I was like, wait, we have a little extra money. Let's just get a small, tiny studio space. And then, but I had to find a place that was soundproof because my husband's a drummer. And we're going to share it. And I found this building. It hadn't been finished yet. The building had not been finished yet, but they were renting out supposedly soundproof studio spaces. And they showed me these little tiny, like little $500 rooms or whatever. And just at an inkling, I was just like, show me what the biggest space you've got. And they showed me the space that we're in right now. And it did not look like the way it did. And I had an aha moment. I was just, and it brought me to going back to Toledo. And I was just looked at it.
We're back to freedom.
We're back to freedom. And I was just like, you know what? You know, we're working 9 to 5, and the place is going to be sitting here empty. But if we get a bigger space and we rent it out, you know, while we're at work, it'll pay for itself. That was my plan. That was it. Just rent it out.
How'd that plan work out?
That was the initial plan. Just pay for itself. It just ballooned into something totally different. So we took a leap of faith, took our tax refund. That's how we put down the deposit. We had to pay like a couple extra deposits. But it was cool though, because the building wasn't done yet, they gave us the first 6 months free.
Wow.
And so I looked at my husband and I was just like, real talk. How, if we have this 6 months to build out, how long do you think it'll to do this build? And my husband's just like, oh, we can do it in like 2 months or whatever. I'm just like, all right. But I'd watched
as many wives will look at their husbands and say, oh, okay.
Okay. I was actually watching my father-in-law, because my father-in-law, we make these boutique guitar amps, but I'd watch him kind of starting his business. He was a teacher as well. And one of the things that I noticed with a lot of my friends starting their businesses was that they were kind of stuck at this particular space where they're not really fully committed to the business yet. So it's run kind of like a mom and pop shop, but they're stuck there. But on the other hand, taking that leap of faith and just quitting your job sounds crazy. But we're lucky, we're married. So I was just like, I'll keep working at Macy's. I was like, but if one of us isn't fully committed to this every day, this isn't going to happen. So we started, and 2 years later of construction, we stand in this building, or in this space. But the idea at first was to build an all-inclusive production house. A lot of my friends are artists, a lot of my friends are musicians, and we wanted to build a space for the mid-level musician, someone who's not Justin Bieber yet, but people who have steady work. After you make the music and you record and everything like that, there's all this other stuff that you have to do. And I was sick and tired of seeing these amazing musicians who had terrible marketing, and then so no one knows them. And then people who have really great marketing, but then you hear the music and it's terrible. Yeah. And I realized that people can't work on both. But it would be really cool if they had like a one-stop shop. So we had a 2-story space. So downstairs is our recording studio. Live room, so we can record any other instruments that we want. We have a vocal booth, a mix room, but anything musically that you want to record, we can do downstairs. And upstairs, I call it you watch Harry Potter?
Yeah.
I call this the room of requirement.
Oh my goodness. All right.
So it's basically whatever you need it to be. So when we first opened the studio, upstairs was done. We would rent it out for events. So this place that you're sitting right here was our stage. And then we had like 2 PA systems. We would have parties here. We'd have events here. But then now it's my photo studio.
Awesome. I'll just lay this context down. So, as I walked in downstairs, beautiful studio, you definitely get a vibe and a feel that music is being created there. And then as you walk upstairs here, it definitely looks like a photo studio here. We're sitting in this space that actually is laid out a little bit like a bar right now, I think, but this is where the stage would be. And we're actually looking out to the left, and there's a full room. There's a little disco ball at the top and some big lights for the photo studio. It's pretty cool. So
like this bar is on wheels. So the idea was that everything was going to be on wheels, and we could turn the room into whatever we needed. So whatever stage you were in your development. So say you're a musician, for example. It's like, okay, I recorded my music here. And because we have the live room, you don't have to get samples and get that cleared and pay for that. You can kind of—
I love that. And that's big right now too, for anybody that's a YouTube creator, right? It's like, all right, how do we, do these great videos, have stuff that's on the platform, but not get into copyright trail. I've ran into that stuff. So one of the things that's really cool, and I know we talked about this before we went live, but this idea that it took you 2 years to build out, but you didn't really owe any money after that, where you saw other folks that, peers in the space, they built out in 6 months, but they owed all this money, and maybe the business wasn't going to work out for
Absolutely. Them. So the construction that we took was huge construction, because we did what you don't see behind the walls is all the spray foam insulation.
Well, there's an actual floor here with it wasn't here. I mean, that's pretty damn impressive.
Or we have these extra wide stairs that are floating so they don't squeak. We brought this refrigerator up here, big, so we can put a lot of equipment up and down, and it can handle wear and tear. So other people, the other neighbors spent about $100,000 on a bunch of really nice material that looks great, but didn't stand up to wear and tear. So 3 months in, their floors are trash, their walls are trash. So to be watching your space get trashed and still be paying for it starts you
Not
at
good business.
a deficit. So when we opened up, it's just like we were broke, but the rent was paid and there was no overhead. So all the money that we made was coming back to us automatically. So we were able to feel that return.
So talk to us, because we never actually did get to like all the things that I know you're starting a bunch of projects. You are working on podcasts. You've had episodes, right? So talk to us about some of that stuff, because we're getting to that point now where I think, I want to make sure that people know where to go to kind of follow your content and all that jazz.
So like we were talking about as far as freedom. So it's like, okay, great. We finally got this space. I can leave, blah, blah, blah. But one of the freedoms we had was also the freedom to say no. And a lot of the clients that can afford us weren't necessarily always the clients we wanted to work with. So my husband turned around and he looked at me, and I know that look. And he was just like, let's start a record label. And I was just like, he's like, well, we have everything here. We have we have the entire means of production. We can record it here. We can do all the marketing or whatever. And I didn't show it to you, but there's an outdoor space where we can do concerts.
Oh, wow.
So it's like we have the venue, album release, everything we need to do. And I was just like, but I don't know anything about what are you talking about? He was just like, and he just looked at me. He was just like, Diane, a record label could be whatever we say it is. And I was just like,
well, and that's pretty big, though. I mean, that idea that, jumping into stuff, as long as you're minding your P's and Q's in terms of, all right, I'm running a business, not a money suck.
Yeah.
Right. It can be whatever the hell.
It can be whatever. And that was the thing, was that because I'd kind of learned how to be handy, like we'd save so much money by building this ourselves, that it seems like anything's possible.
Yeah.
That you're now only limited by your imagination. When you own the means of production, you can kind of just decide what you're going to do, because you only have to rely on yourself. You don't have to rely
on
so many people
are like, I'm going to wait till I have the right moment. I'm going to wait till I have the right partner. I'm going to wait till I have the expertise. I'm going to wait till I have this. And what do they end up doing? They just end up waiting, and it never actually happens. So I love that you guys just jumped into it. Yeah.
Well, the thing was, we weren't afraid to look bad. Like even with photography, I had kind of jumped to the front of the line from the time that I first picked up a camera. And, we have there was a lot of my friends that said they were photographers, but you never saw their pictures. And
listen, if you got a business out there, I was sort of say, make sure that the people around you know what you're doing, that you're promoting it. Don't keep it a secret.
Don't keep it a secret. And also don't be afraid to fail.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to fail, because that was the biggest thing that I kind of learned leaving New York, was learning how important failure is. Because while we were building the place, we had this great business model where we were going to rent upstairs for events and then record downstairs. And that was a great business model in theory. But when we were actually doing it, it didn't fit our lifestyle. So we were able to be agile, and our business plan has probably changed like 20 different times, but we never moved backwards. But we always, because we were never overly married to any particular idea, when something changed, like say, for example, COVID, we had to pivot our entire business model. But by that time we were used to it. It didn't really bother us so much. Like the thing that I think holds a lot of people back is holding on to certain dreams too tightly, or holding on to a version of a dream.
Yeah, that outcome, that very specific outcome that.
And it's just like, if it doesn't come out in this very specific way, then it's not okay. But there are all these things that make me happy now that just because I didn't think of it, I would have missed out on it.
Yeah.
Just because the thought just didn't come to my mind to do it this way. I would have never thought to start a record label, but I could never imagine doing something else now. So the record label is basically, we still have our production house, so we still take clients, and that's kind of how we keep the lights on and stuff. And we make packages for people, basically, depending on who you are. And one of the things that we're actually starting, I've just started doing this is creating like a monthly subscription package for some of my clients, because I have clients that are actors.
So what are some of the things that are included in that subscription package?
Well, I'm still working on that. But from a photography standpoint, on the subscription package, is I have people who are influencers, Instagram models, people that are on there. So basically, like, they pay a monthly service and then they come in every month and get their pictures done. Just like, you know, you get your monthly wax appointment or whatnot.
No, we've talked about that before we came into this. You know, if you're a influencer, you're on social media, you're in the marketing space, you have a show, you have a podcast, you know, people get tired, I think, of, or at least I do. I don't know about people in general. I mean, there's the one thing where you want to keep your brand consistent, but in terms of showcasing different images and providing something interesting for people to look at on the packaging, the YouTube thumbnail, on the different things on your website, being up to date, being creative, having this regular thing. I know I talked to you, like, I'm dedicated, I don't know about monthly, but definitely quarterly, coming in and making sure that I do some brand new sets of photos, because I've committed to this and I want to make sure that the art piece of it is interesting.
Well, and not just that too. One of the things that has been one of my biggest strengths is working with the same people. So when I started the record label, the guy who does my branding, this guy who went to Parsons, I went to New School with, my lawyer, I've known since the second grade. Everyone on my board is either people I went to college with or people I've known a really long time. And as a result, we work a lot more efficiently. So I would joke around that I don't have a lot of new clients, but I have a lot of old clients, because as a photographer, the people that I was taking pictures of, you know, when we were younger, I've kind of grown with them. And then
strength of relationships
the
is
strength
huge,
of those. So now, you know, I have this one client. She's like, I won't let anyone photograph my face. She's an actress. She's like, you're the only one who knows really, because I've spent 10 years studying her face. So I know all of her angles, but I can sit there and tell her, hey, you look tired today, go home and we'll come back a different day. And I'll have that flexibility because I'm not going to.
Because I definitely have been the guy that showed up to the photo shoot and was like, all right, I got to make it pop.
But yeah, a new photographer is not going to tell you you've got bags under your eyes. But my motto is, if you look bad, I look bad. And that's with photography. No one cares why the photograph sucked. That's my job from a technical standpoint. My job is to do that. But my job, like I was doing with the coders, is to be that translator. Like, you're, you know, whatever it is that you do, like, you don't do photography. My job is to just make you look good. And how that happens, no one needs to know how the sausages are made. But but I get you there. So some of our biggest clients, actually the client I'm most proud of is Movement for Black Lives. So we did the branding for them. So like I said, this is a one-stop shop. So my husband did the audio branding. Our branding guy did their entire look for their website, and the look and media for all their social media. So that was really good. And so with the record label, you know, getting back to what my husband said, it could be whatever you want. I was just like, okay, well, if we're going to have a record label, then it's got to be like Warhol's Factory, and we got to represent not just musicians, but visual artists. And I'm like, okay. So and my friend came in and was like, well, you know, those visual artists and the musicians, they need critics. So now we have the podcast. So we have this nice little ecosystem from and
that's Binge Click, right?
And that's Binge Click. Yeah. So Binge Click, we call ourselves a consortium of especially woke MCs, but we're like, everyone can be in the cipher, not just rappers. So it's like, if Wu-Tang had let other people into Wu-Tang other than just rappers, what if Wu-Tang let photographers in? What if Wu-Tang let hip hop critics in? And now we have these rappers that are not. It was
already a crowded stage. I can't imagine what that stage looked like, but that sounds cool, though. Yeah.
But yeah, that was the idea. It was like that next iteration of Wu-Tang, where there are all these different things that go into making art. That's not just art, and honoring and respecting those things. So now, you know, getting back to like New School or whatever, my message is still the same, but now. It's coming through the music, it's coming through the visuals, it's coming through a way that's a lot more accessible than the career that I was doing in fine art, where somebody would buy a piece and it'd be sitting in their closet and maybe 100 of their rich friends would ever see it. And that didn't sit well with me. But now, you know, we're coming out with a mixtape that has a bunch of trap songs. I'm too old for trap, but I love it. But how these young Black men are being photographed is being photographed in an empowering way that elevates their brand, that elevates their consciousness, that isn't,
I love that.
that doesn't, that they're not putting forth my vision. We're collaborating, and I'm helping them kind of decide who they are visually. Because right now, especially with Instagram, Facebook, you don't have to be a photographer, but everyone communicates through the photograph.
Yeah.
And if you can't take the picture yourself, you need to work with someone you trust.
Well, media is so important, and being able to kind of stand out in the noise with just really good stuff. I mean, it's so easy. I don't want to say it's easy, but it's easier today because of the quality of the phones that we hold in our hands, with the, the photographic equipment that gives us. There's just no excuse for not having it. And so when I see somebody, I'm big on LinkedIn. By the way, Diane's LinkedIn is down below, as well as her website. So please feel free to check her out. If you're on Facebook, check it out on the side there. But this idea that, I'm going to have an image up in my LinkedIn profile, and it's not sharp, and it's not something that, sort of talks about me.
It's not necessarily,
there's no excuse for it, right?
Well, it's not even that there's no excuse for it. There's actually a ton of excuses for it, because one of the things that people should understand with photographs is a bad picture doesn't define you. It defines the photographer, because people can't see themselves how they are. It's just I don't know if it's something in just genetically how we are. We only see our flaws, our biggest flaws. So we don't necessarily know how to use our image to communicate, unless that's your job. Like if you're an actor or you're a model.
So let's try to help some people right now. So they're trying to, they're going to, because they got to get a better picture into their LinkedIn profile. Big criticism on the LinkedIn thing is don't, put that photo of you when you were 20 years old, if you're a 60-year-old person, all that kind of stuff. So what are some simple tips that you would give folks if they wanted to do it themselves to create some good pictures of themselves?
Okay, first things first, work with a photographer you trust.
So you're saying don't do it yourself, work with a photographer.
Work with a photographer you trust. So I'm sure a lot of women have had this experience where someone takes a really unflattering image of you and then tags you on Facebook. Whatever the friend is that takes good pictures of you, whatever that energy is, look for that. So I'd always say, look for someone who loves you. So the only person I let really photograph me, because I'm such a control freak, is my husband. Because I know he loves me. He thinks I'm pretty, so he takes good pictures of me. But no one else. I don't let anybody else take pictures of me. But it's more important that, like I said, the relationship that you have with the photographer than necessarily their gear. Right now, we live in a world where cameras are taking spectacular pictures. So making sure that you're relaxed. It's not so much about the lights and all that stuff. That's important too. That is important. But if, say, you're choosing a photographer and you have to pick between, different photographers, the one that can make you smile the most natural is the best. Because I'm the kind of person, like, as soon as a camera comes and I'm like trying to pose, I'm like, you want to be behind the camera. You don't. I want to be behind the camera, not in front of the camera. So I'm.
But I like that you said energy, because when I think about people that have taken good pictures of me, it's usually people that have good energy with. I feel comfortable around, and I feel like smiling, or I feel like being myself, versus somebody that I'm not comfortable with.
Yeah. One of the things that I have in common with a lot of my clients is that they're not necessarily creatives. They're not front of house creatives. I specialize in working with people that get nervous in front of the camera, people that aren't used to having their pictures taken. So when I would do weddings, it'll be like somebody who works like in finance or something like that, but they're getting married and like everyone's looking at you and you're being hyper aware and you're not ready for this. Or like one of my clients, like she never really wore makeup and it was her wedding day and she didn't know how to like go through that whole thing. She ended up flying me down to Miami for her wedding, which I was like, that's crazy. I was like, I know some photographers in Miami. She's like, no, I want you, because when we
it's so weird because you say, because I'm in that business. So anytime you say somebody like never does something and they're going to do it for their wedding day, like in my soul, there's a voice screeching like, no, don't do something so totally different from what you do. I'm not saying don't dress up, but don't go to the extreme, because you're just not
it's a
gonna
little
love it.
different.
Yeah.
I think it's a little different for women because they kind of have to. So like, for example, she wanted to get her hair done. So she didn't hire me because I had the best equipment or because like, I mean, there were honestly much more slick photographers, I thought, but I coached her throughout the entire shoot. And like I went to the hairdresser with her, and it was a really humid day that day. So I said to the hairdresser, what I want is I want you to put the curlers in, and we're going to leave with the curlers. And I'm going to take the curlers out right before the shoot. And she was like, no, I don't want anyone in my, leaving my salon not looking perfect or whatever. And so I took her to the side, and I had a very New York moment with her. I was like, I don't give a fuck what you're doing. She's walking out of here with curlers. If I have to slip you an extra 20 or I have to pay for the curlers or whatever. But I sat there, and I was the bad guy for her because I knew with the humidity, her hair wasn't going to last.
I love that. Yeah.
But because I stood up for her and basically I did what I needed to do to get my shot. So she wasn't hiring me to be the photographer. She was hiring me to protect her mental peace so that when it was time for her to smile, it was a real and genuine smile. I've had different brides who've had toxic mothers who I've had to go have mean talking to. And that's why they would pay me the big bucks. They would fly me out to wherever they were because I would go above and beyond to make sure that their energy was protected in order for me to get my picture. Yeah. Whereas another photographer, in an effort to be polite or whatever, will and their pictures are going to come out horrible. They'll have all the right equipment, all the right settings or whatever, but you can't make a miserable person look happy.
Yeah, good art you gotta kind of fight for. I've definitely seen those moments even within our own stuff where you sort of say, all right, I'm just gonna not say, and I'm not gonna critique, or I'm not gonna fix this thing. And then what happens is, there's these little pieces. You're setting up a stage. Basically when you're doing photography for your business or something like that. And so when you don't have just one little element right, that's what a photo does. It captures everything.
It captures everything, and that also taught me a lot too, as far as like you own your means of production, but also clients will be loyal to you if they feel like that they trust you and that they're feeling like they're being protected by you. And I realized that's why people were hiring me, and they wouldn't go to anybody else, even though there's tons of photographers in every major city. And that was the major thing that I really noticed, and they would be loyal to that, because when you find someone who cuts your hair just exactly the way that you want it, you stick with them. But if you find someone who photographs you exactly the way that you want it, it's just one less thing for you to think about.
Somebody that you're working with that's a good vendor, you don't want to give them up. All right, so we've gone. I love talking to you. I want to give people the opportunity to connect with you. So again, LinkedIn down below, website to connect with Diane. Diane, let people know what you got going on, where they can connect with you. I'm going to try to focus it on you a little bit. Get this camera out of there. All right. So tell them so they're going to Binge Click. I know that's something that you should be looking out for. They can go to the website for photography and LinkedIn.
I just updated my website. So now we have booking online. So you can go directly on my website, look to see what kind of style that you want. You can also contact me for a personal consultation if there's something new that you need. Also follow us at BingeClick, BingeClique on Instagram, and watch out for notifications. We're going to be dropping our mixtape soon. And also you can listen to our podcast. It's streaming everywhere that podcasts are available. So Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and it's called The Devil Advocates. And you just type in Binge Click. It's Binge Click presents The Devil Advocates.
Excellent. All right, say goodbye to everybody. We're going to play us off with the BizDev theme.
BizDev Live, weekdays at 11 Eastern Time. BizDev Live, weekdays at 11 Eastern Time. BizD with C, brought to you by Cameron T. BizD with C, brought to you by Cameron T. This is business development, not even selling it. This is intelligent. If you watch it, I promise you benefit. Leadership and motivation, empathy and inspiration. Leadership and motivation, empathy and inspiration. BizDev Live, weekdays at 11 Eastern Time. BizDev Live, weekdays at 11 Eastern Time. BizD with C, brought to you by Cameron T. BizD with C.